Hello. Well, there's a lot of things to talk about today. And first off, I want to go into the situation over at the EU where they have just approved a 90% oil embargo against Russia. And this goes into effect at the end of the year. And surprisingly, I guess a lot of the countries kind of cratered that were holding out. And despite the fact that this is going to have severe ramifications on Europe, they decided to suicide their economies. And there's been a lot of articles and predictions, especially like in the UK, of how dire the situation is becoming. And you know it's way worse than what they're telling you if the laughable media tabloids of the UK, it's utterly like Zimbabwe, level media. And if they're telling you it's bad, it's way worse. And I mean, these are the guys who are telling you that, Putin's dead and there's a body double, going around. And he looks exactly like the Putin. You cannot tell the difference. He talks and he acts the same. Of course, Lavrov came out and he said, this is, utterly ridiculous. Now, Lavrov also made some comments about the U.S. sanctions were in place, prior to, Russia launching their special military operation. That's what they call it. And there's also been other talk, too, that these sanctions were all written up and ready to go. Now, this kind of supports, my theory. And of course, doing, extensive sanctions, it's not something you're going to come up with overnight, right? And you would have to get, some amount of general agreement, between all the parties before they would enact these. So this is something that I think is pretty obvious if you look at it, in a logical sense. That you could see they probably really were done ahead of time, okay? Which just supports the whole assertion I have that the West, instigated the war. And this goes along with, the 1,000% increase in shelling into the Donbass area, the dramatic escalation of the Ukrainian forces. They had deployed a large increase in, more tanks and a lot of other equipment as if they were ready to do an invasion. And they were. And that's why Putin jumped in when he did, because he wanted to attack before they attacked. And also, you could see, like, when you look at the slip-ups, that Biden made, that you can tell that there was some prior knowledge. The whole idea, like, how would he know that slip-up he did about that Putin invading and only invading a certain amount, and that was considered enough for like sanctions and something along these lines. And it kind of gave you the impression that, especially now, if you go back and listen, that he was aware of what was going to happen. Now, keep in mind, he's demented and he's competent, so he doesn't have the capacity to know, what he should and shouldn't say sometimes. That's why you're getting all these slips. People are saying they're the Freudian slips. They're really not. He just doesn't have the capability to know what he should and shouldn't say. And this is where, like when you look at what happened in Taiwan, regarding Taiwan, and I mean, there's an endless amount of blunders gotten him in trouble. So the fact that they were all ready to go just tells you how devious this whole thing was. And I'm not even talking about being devious against like Putin and Russia. Of course, they have culpability in all this. I'm not trying to excuse them. But the deviousness is upon the Ukrainian people and the people of Europe. Now, as Queen Maxima came out and said, she is a United Nations representative, and she said that the people, I think she's talking mostly people of Europe, that if you were eating 3 meals before, or maybe 2, that you're probably going to have just 1 meal now to get by. Now, do you think Queen Maxima is going to be cutting down on her caviar and her wine to 1 meal? I think you know the answer. Do you think Boris Party and Johnson is going to cut down? Do you think creepy Joe Biden is going to be cutting back? Or Nancy Pelosi? No, but you are expected to cut back. And not only that, as an American, you have been introduced to one of the largest money sieves, a money pit that's going to last for years. Now, in contrast, let's look at the Afghanistan war. It looks like approximately $80 billion, somewhere in this vicinity. And you also have to inflation adjust and things like this, over like 20 years. So, looking at Ukraine, this incredible money pit has been unleashed. You're looking at, it was 56 billion prior to the new Ukrainian aid package, which includes the multiple launch rocket systems. And I don't even have a figure on that yet. Let's say that's another 5 billion. So we're up to 60 billion. Now this is just in a few weeks. Okay. About 50 some billion has just been in the last couple weeks. There was some before that, but the bulk of this is actually even in the last few days. So can you imagine the money pit that's coming for you? Now, if you look at like a Vietnam, that was a massive money pit. This dwarfs that. That's going to be like a Grenada, an invasion of Grenada. This is something that's going to have a huge effect on American, deficits, military spending. It's going to have a massive blowback. And we're already seeing devaluation of the dollar. I mean, why do you think we have, they say it's 8%. It's really about 19%. You have to look at the real inflation numbers, which you go to Shadow Stats, and that'll tell you what the real number is. So, why do you think we have this rampant inflation? You really think it's just from a supply chain issue with China? Or do you think it's because we've got a lot of crooks in Congress who just love to spend like monopoly money? I think you know the answer. And this is going to go on and on. Now, the problem with all this inflation, everyone thinks, I'll get a raise at work and everything. It's not quite that easy. For one, wages, this is a proven fact, during periods of high inflation, never keep up with the cost of living. And inflation could literally just spin off the charts. I mean, when you look at like countries that had hyperinflation, like Venezuela and, like Weimar Germany, it was like this for a long time. It didn't just go like overnight, like the line went straight up in a parabolic sense. It took a little while for all that to happen. But we could wake up one day, and it could be parabolic. And you'll hear some, concocted reasons, in CNBC and these other financial, stations and news outlets, Bloomberg and so on. They'll have some prepared excuses. But I think everyone's kind of knowing, the reality that uncontrolled spending leads to inflation. And Americans going to have to deal with that. And this whole Ukraine, war financing is just getting started. So you could see it kind of goes back to, like what Obama was saying about Biden, is that don't underestimate, how Joe Biden can F things up. And if you haven't come to that realization by now, then you're not paying attention very much, are you? Now, however, I actually think it's a lot more sinister than that. You probably heard in my other videos that I think this is a lot to do by design. And they're basically just rolling, Creepy Joe out in a gurney and propping his body up. As long as old Joe is willing to, take the rap for all these failures, it's like they're happy with that. The old guy's happy with that, and the cabal who's really running things is real happy with that, because they need kind of like a dumb face, out there to kind of, take all the responsibility for these horrendous failures. So, I talked about, cannibalization, of the United States, and it's kind of a term I kind of came up with where basically it's like companies, prominent, oligarchs, politicians especially, a lot of just, corrupt individuals or groups of individuals. Give you an example, like, look at 9/11, the day before, they announced 1.9 trillion was missing. It had to go somewhere. And you could ask Doc Zockham where that went, because he was the guy in charge of it. And you could probably figure that out, where his citizenships alliances go. And you can trace that money. But no one, of course, did. So you've got a lot of that going on, and then you have Austin Fitz. She's like investigating, it's the money has seemed to disappear. So this has been going on. They've been raiding the system for years. And it's like a shell game. Everyone thinks it's over here in this shell. And everyone's just content that it's really there. And then someone peeks under that shell. They're like, oh my God, it's not there. Oh, it's over in this other shell now. They moved it. It's kind of like a game like that. And you've got these politicians that are doing everything they can to suck money out of this system. I mean, look what happened during the pandemic. A lot of these pandemic packages that, all these funding things, they were all like scams. And then they had that infrastructure bill. Everyone was like, yeah, we're getting the money to build the bridges. Hold your horses. Only 13% of that massive, like almost $2 trillion package went to anything to do with infrastructure. And then, well, you think that even went to infrastructure, and it didn't. As Pete Buttigieg had come out and popped a lot of people's balloons. You were thinking those roads with all the potholes were going to get fixed. No, instead, that money's going to shifty companies that are making traffic cameras, which are going to be all over the United States. Another money pit. And you're the one who's going to suffer when you get those automatic tickets in the mail that you went 10 miles an hour over the limit. You didn't even know where and when that happened. But they got you on film with one of old Pete's little cameras. Old Pistol Pete is going to get you. So, as you can see, everything basically is kind of falling into place. Is like, when you look into it hard enough, everything is basically a scam. And you look at this Ukrainian aid package. You know, that's another one where only 13 billion actually is going towards arms to help Ukraine. Now, this is all going, the shifty contractors. I saw one drone they're providing Ukraine. It's like $6,000 per drone. And all this stuff is like super overpriced. It's obviously a lot of that's not even going to get over to Ukraine. They're given like old World War II weapons, javelins with past their shelf life, with no batteries. That's why none of the crap works over there. Ukrainians aren't even using these things. They have a 50 to 75% fail rate. And if you criticize any of the Western weapons, you get in a load of trouble, since the Zelensky decree forbidding criticism of Western weapons. I wonder why. Now, most of the Ukraine aid package goes unaccounted for. And it's supposedly going into, as per Zelensky. Now keep in mind, this guy's he's already pulled out $500 million. I mean, this guy's a crook, a criminal. So, according to Biden and Zelensky, a large portion of this Ukrainian aid package just goes over to Ukraine to, quote, pay salaries and other costs regarding the government of Ukraine. So, you know where that money's going, and it's not going to employees of the government. You know that for sure. I mean, this is the most corrupt country in the world. So, this is all going to slush funds, offshore accounts. Why do you think Pelosi, Schumer, and Adam Kinzinger, and Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney were all pounding the table so hard on getting this thing passed and over to old Creepy Joe's desk so he can get that signature? They had like a couple days get this thing done before the Washington Post article came out, basically confirming the money pit theory. That you're just throwing money down a sinkhole because Ukraine's going down. They don't care. They don't care anything about the Ukrainian military. They don't care anything about the Ukrainian people. And you think the propagandist behind this whole war, do you think they care anything about Ukrainians? Think about it. What do they want? They want to kill Ukrainians. They don't want the war to end. And like this advisor to Zelensky, I mean, this guy's like a real thug. He's like a professional blogger that ended up somehow as a presidential advisor. And he goes around cursing everybody who doesn't agree with him. Literally, he's cursing on the world stage. He told world leaders to F off. He went after Kissinger with F-bombs. And the same thing to Germany. He claimed that because Germany didn't give him the artillery that he needed. Like, this guy's like some thug. Like, he's, like Al Capone. He's like demanding, Germany hand over stuff. Here's this blogger. And he's demanding German leaders hand over weapons to him. And because they didn't hurry up and give him the weapons that he demanded right away. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. How come none of this stuff is in the media? I mean, the craziness of everything that's really happening. And Zelensky and this guy are basically, everyone in the world, it's their, it's because all these countries didn't give up everything to him. I mean, how egotistical these bastards are. Everyone's supposed to just suffer and have their economies go into collapse. To give him the 100% full oil embargo he was demanding. Not to mention he wanted a full naval blockade of Russia. I mean, that's war. That's World War III. So because everyone didn't fall down on their hands and knees to praise the egotistical bastard Zelensky, who's high as a kite on meth. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I feel like, I'm like banging my head against the wall. How do people not see this stuff? And you basically have, the entire Europe, like going into like this global, the whole world is going into a recession. But I mean, Europe is just going to go down the tubes. And they're talking 1 meal a day, no heat. This coming up, winter. That's what they're saying. Like especially in the UK, it's going to be a lot of misery, and they're already preparing the people for that. Not to mention they have record high fuel prices for, their cars, and gas stations are out of fuel, and I mean, it's becoming like just a hideous situation. But that's not enough pain for Zelensky. Not to mention Zelensky brought this whole situation on. I mean, he brought this on himself. He brought this on Europe. He was the fool who was going around touting that, he was going to become the newest member of NATO, even though that was impossible. That was not going to happen. You can watch the videos of the State Department officials laughing how they duped Zelensky into thinking that he was going to get into NATO. Now it's all over the news basically that confirming it that was never going to happen. But that's not what they told you before. Remember Kamala brain dead Harris went over to Europe to thank Zelensky for applying for NATO? That was the final straw for Putin. Because he heard it from a prominent Western politician. There's number 2 in the United States. It makes it sound like that they really are going to get this crazed drug addict into NATO. And she's so brainless, she didn't even realize that she was being played the fool. Because if she had any sense, if she was smart and had a couple brain cells that worked, she would have known that that's not going to happen. and that she didn't realize that she was provoking a huge war. I mean, this stupid bimbo didn't realize that she basically initiated a huge war. So, Zelensky was played. He was made to fool. And instead of coming to terms with that, and also, old creepy Joe Biden, he's another one. He's basically was played to fool too. And when, and they both double down on stupid. They're both egotistical. One's demented and one's whacked out on drugs. This is a great combination, So the thing, this is just going to go on until like some rational people, and some tried to throw a little cold water on this, like look what happened to Kissinger. Basically he was told to F off. I mean, thug government officials in Ukraine. What else do you need to know? So, I mean, I think the problem, for sane people is that they see this and you see all the characters involved and how just a few characters, Putin included, caused this entire war and a lot of suffering. Think about being a man between 18 and 65 in Ukraine. You're forced to go to the front lines. You're basically given a gun and told to shoot at a target a couple times so you know where the trigger is. Then you're sent to the front lines where you die. There is so much death on those front lines over in Donbass that Russians are bewildered. And I wish I could show videos of the fields just strewn with Ukrainian bodies. You're never going to see this on mainstream media. It's horrific. The bodies are going to lie there until, who do you think has to pick up those bodies? Who's picking up those bodies? The Russians. And they smell so bad, the Russians got to go pick up the bodies. The Ukrainian government doesn't even care to retrieve their own bodies. Now, the Russians are tired of even asking Ukraine if they want to come pick up their bodies. Now, there's reasons why the Ukraine government is not doing it. One is they don't want people to know how many people died. How many people? I'm not even going to say soldiers, because these are just guys that were sent to the front lines. They're not even soldiers. They don't want the families to know because of propaganda. I mean, how evil is that? That you're just going to leave bodies to rot in the field. So, if you're not disturbed by what's going on over there, I think you probably haven't done enough research, because this whole thing on every level is very, very disturbing. And it's going to get to you. Because this is something I would say is kind of almost on a Pol Pot level. When you find out about, the torture, the, quote, massacres that happened, and you find out what really happened. I mean, these are just sick people. And, just looking at one of the newest events that you're not going to hear about in the media is that in a city called Sumny. It's a border city, that the Ukrainians were going to initiate a confrontation with Russian border guards. They would draw the Russian border guards into retaliate. They would detonate large amount of toxic chemicals, which would cause the deaths and burning of hundreds, if not thousands, of innocent civilians. Now, of course, they invited all the Western mainstream media with foreknowledge that they would get to watch this horrific event unfold. So if this doesn't reek of pure evil, if this is not in your mind on the level Pol Pot, what is? And this was a false flag plot that would be something probably on the lines of like 9/11, for them. And thank God that the plot was exposed. So anyway, kind of leave you with that today. Some disturbing developments, and again, this whole thing seems on a escalatory trajectory until there's some sane minds that get a grasp on things over there. Thanks for listening.